Hello, Popsicles and Power Brokers. My name is TB Skyn, and welcome to the first issue of Ashe, WARMOTHER, a collaboration between Marvel Comics and Riot Games to create a new origin and do a little bit of storytelling in the League of Legends universe. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a while, you may know that I have for a very long time been hounding Riot about properly taking advantage of the medium of comics in order to expand the lore of their universe, and fortunately, they have finally taken my particular advice and are doing this entirely because I have been criticizing them and trying to force them to do so. That is 100% the way that I choose to interpret this turn of events. This is definitely the reason why this is happening, and no other reasons whatsoever. It's me. I'm taking credit for it. It's me. I get my check in the mail, right, soon. Give me the money. Because this is if this is good, then it's entirely my credit, and if it's bad, well, then it's entirely your fault. All kidding aside, the reason why Marvel and Riot are partnering up for this particular comic is, from Marvel's perspective, of course, they want access to the League of Legends market, which is, a heck of a lot of young adults, age 18 to 35, which is the lucrative market that everybody wants to get their hands on, and so having access to the League of Legends IP is a valuable avenue for Marvel to promote themselves and the rest of their work. From Riot's perspective, Riot wants to put this comic out as a physical release. They have also been doing a lot more promotional work in getting the word out about League of Legends and replenishing their player base, which, depending on which rumors you listen to, has been taking a bit of a hit in recent times, and so, for their purposes, Marvel has access to the printing and distribution network that you need in order to put a comic out internationally. That stuff is no mean feat. It requires access to a whole host of infrastructure and a whole lot of experienced workers that Riot themselves simply do not have. Therefore, the partnership with Marvel makes sense. It does introduce a somewhat new element to the development of League of Legends lore, however, because for the first time in a very, very long time, for the first time in perhaps ever, honestly, we can now look forward to consistent, ongoing, and persistently updated lore content from League of Legends. A story that is not just one short story uploaded to the universe and then kind of forgotten about. A story which is not just like a bio update or some kind of short story in conjunction with the promotion for the release of a champion or whatever, but an actual ongoing piece of storytelling that isn't tied to any particular piece of in-game content or any type of skin or any type of new champion release. An actual story being told in the League of Legends universe. And it's a little bit sad that it's pretty much now the first time that we can go, okay, this is going to happen once a month for the next 4 months. Lovely to have something to look forward to have something to drive conversation. This is part of the reason why I've been hounding Riot for so long, to actually get a little bit more consistent with their lore output and to start telling ongoing consistent stories in the League of Legends universe, because now I know for sure that whatever story gets told here, everything that happens in this comic is going to be followed up on. There is going to be a part 2 to the story coming out later on down the line that I can look forward to, rather than some kind of short story or bio update being uploaded to the universe, setting up a bunch of plot threads that then are never ever followed up on for 4 years, which has been the pattern with Riot Games so far. In partnering with Marvel, Riot has finally been forced to make a real commitment to doing a little bit more, consistent work on updating the lore, and I'm very happy about that, because it is frankly bizarre that League of Legends has had so much trouble establishing that basic concept for storytelling for so long. Of course, this is a one-shot deal. Marvel presumably will want to monetize the hell out of the League of Legends IP, and I'm sure they're going to be pitching a bunch of projects to Riot, anything that they can get them to agree on. But Riot, as we all know, is a little bit more fickle and mercurial, and we can't really be sure that this will really be followed up by much more than whatever Marvel and Riot have signed a contract on so far. And we don't know, maybe that includes multiple other comic series that Riot will be working with Marvel on in the future. Who knows what's kinds of contracts and what kind of projects have been started. But for now, this is unfortunately all we have. And I'm going to have to mess with the zoom levels a little bit here. So the artwork for this particular comic is done by Nina Wakueba, an artist who is known as Serpanger on Twitter. There's going to be a link down in the description to her profile, and I recommend you go follow her. I've been following her for a very long time. She's a tremendously talented artist, and I'm really, really happy that she's finally getting to work on such a high-profile project and that she's getting, this kind of exposure. She's done a hell of a lot of really good work in the past, but I think this is her highest profile work to date. Don't necessarily quote me on that. Go and look it up for yourself. It's really, really good. The writing has been done by Odin Austin Schaefer, who is a narrative designer at Riot Games. So they have retained a substantial amount of creative control over the project, which Marvel, I suspect, has only been too happy to give them, and which will also have been the contingency upon which the entirety of the deal rolled. Like, Riot has always been jealously, almost obsessively protective of their IP and very, very wary of letting outsiders mess with it. So it's natural that it's one of their own narrative designers who gets to helm the writing pen on this particular piece of work. So let's have a look at the comic itself. The basic concept of the comic is a reworking of Ashe's origin story. Now, if you've been playing League of Legends for a while, you may know that Ashe is one of the oldest characters in the game, being one of the beta champions released back when the game was first, even released to the public. And her story, for a very long time, has been one of a relatively simplistic series of contrasts with some of the other leaders in the Freljord. In the Freljord, we have Lysandra, who represents sort of the sorcery and magic and sort of, darkness and conspiracy in the Freljord, this inscrutable, mystical kind of trickster and manipulator working behind the scenes in order to control the tides of power in the Freljord. Then we have Sejuani, who is the war leader, the uncomplicated, violent, raiding, might makes right kind of brutal Viking leader who prefers that the Freljord exists in a kind of, who's rather conservative and who prefers that the Freljord hews close to its ancient martial warrior culture raiding traditions. Ashe then represents the final aspect, which is essentially the, and I don't use this word in the context of modern politics, but the progressive sort of modern peacemaking, not quite democratic, but as close as you get in the universe as the League of Legends leader who's trying to unify the Freljord in a nation of peace, not based on war, but based on unity and cooperation and all those good and lovely values. To that end, she has allied herself with Tryndamere, who is, I believe, in the current state of the lore, still technically her husband. Certainly, there is a piece on the Interactive League of Legends map that seems to imply as much, although that has not really been confirmed in the modern state of League of Legends lore. Now, it used to be that Ashe got her right to lead from possessing the magical True Ice bow of Avarosa, a bow made of true ice, which is a special type of ice in the League of Legends universe that contains immense magical power and gives Ashe not only her power to fight, but also her right of leadership over the Avarosan tribe. And, is sort of the unifying symbol for everything that she's attempting to accomplish as leader of the Freljord. In more recent times, especially with the release of Swain, we have seen some ambiguities introduced into that particular narrative, that Ashe is not simply the inheritor of Avarosa, but that there may be something more complicated going on behind the surface. So, in the current state of Ashe's lore, and I'm looking at it on the universe right now, she finds the bow of Avarosa when she is made leader of her tribe at a much too young age, and a bunch of assassins don't really like that she's leader of the tribe, and they would rather that she was dead and not leader of the tribe. And so Ashe flees these assassins and comes upon a cairn out in the wilderness, a cairn being a kind of burial place, where she finds the bow with which she dispatches her assassins, returns, and becomes the leader of her tribe, using the bow as a symbol to rally around. With the release of Swain, who is the master of secrets in the League of Legends universe, as it were, we got an implication that Ashe found the bow, certainly, but that maybe she didn't quite find it at the grave of Avarosa. I think the quote goes something like, she told them it was the legendary bow of Avarosa, and they believed her, implying that Ashe is not telling the whole truth about where she got this particular ice bow. Ashe WARMOTHER then seems to be representing yet another reworking and yet another introduction of complexity to the story of how Ashe became the leader of the Avarosan tribe, because in this story, Ashe is not really interested in being the war leader of anything. She doesn't particularly want to be a leader. She doesn't particularly want to be a warmonger of any kind, but her mother, oh, her mother does. Graina is Ashe's mother. You can see her in all her formidable glory right here. She is the spear, she is the axe, and she has a true obsession with destiny. In fact, it seems that destiny is about the only thing that can move Graina to do much of anything. And she also has an obsession with the legacy of Avarosa and has spent a lot of her time and a lot of her life chasing after legends of the, legendary resting place of that leader of the Three Sisters, as a means to preserve her tribe, as a means to restore her tribe to greatness in the Freljord. She wants to find the legendary hidden hoard of Avarosa. She wants to find the treasure. She wants to find the power. She wants to find, all of that stuff. Unfortunately, that obsession has led her to be reckless, to take a lot of risks, to lead her tribe in a way that is perhaps not super constructive or good in the long term. And Ashe then is stuck essentially playing peacemaker between her mother and the Iceborn, which are a special class of person in the Freljord who are more able to withstand the cold, who trace a lineage back to the time of the Three Sisters, who have special powers to resist the frost and the darkness, and who have special powers to wield the weapons of true ice, as we can see here. True ice weapons are imbued with the power of the thing called true ice, which is deadly to anyone who is not an Iceborn to touch. Ashe, at this point in the comic, can just barely manage to lift one, while her mother uses 2 such weapons in combat. And Ashe is stuck playing peacemaker between her mother and the Iceborn, and her mother's relentless pursuit of the Horde of Avarosa, and Malcolm, who is the Frost Priest. That is to say, he is one of the people who's aligned, I believe, with Lysandra, but who is essentially the leader of the Hearthbound. And this is a bit of in-universe terminology that, as usual, I'm a little bit annoyed by, but, so be it. Hearthbound are essentially ordinary humans. Humans who can't touch true ice, who can't march uninterrupted for 30 days without getting tired the way that the Iceborn can, who aren't really as durable, but who are nonetheless the majority of Ashe's tribe is made up of the Hearthbound. They are the majority of the people, and Malcolm essentially speaks for them, and so does Ashe's aunt, who's called the heck was the name? Got it up here somewhere. Helner, yeah. Ashe's aunt Helner represents a sort of a counterpoint also to the leadership of Ashe's mother, in that she is much more concerned with the future of the tribe and planting grain and just sort of trying to do the sensible thing and just stay alive rather than chasing constantly after various glories. So, the comic itself, and I'm going to try not to spoil the entirety of it over the course of this discussion, chronicles one particular fateful expedition that Ashe's mother leads the tribe on. Ostensibly, they are going raiding in order to steal resources from some of the other tribes to help them survive the winter. Unfortunately, that may not be the only reason why they are going out, and that sort of becomes the flashpoint of the conflict. Now, narratively, this comic has to solve an interesting problem, because we know what happens to Ashe. Like, we know that she gets the bow. We know that she becomes a leader of one of the greatest tribes in all of the Freljord. We know who Ashe will eventually become. So there isn't really much tension in the, oh my word, will she survive this terrible situation discussion? Because, yeah, we know. Like, we know. So how do you create dramatic tension when the outcome of the story is already, somewhat determined in the minds of the reader? Well, you create tension by introducing elements whose fates are uncertain. Ashe's mother, for instance, we can be pretty sure she's gonna die. But what about Malcolm, the Frost Priest with whom Ashe has a friendly relationship, who is about her age, and who seems to feel a great deal of affection for the young, now I wouldn't say princess, but, for the young daughter of the chieftain. And there's a little bit of implication that certainly they are friends, but that there may be a little bit more to the way that their relationship is going. So the fate of Malcolm becomes all of a sudden an interesting point of tension. How will he survive the events that are going to be unfolding? How will he react when Ashe all of a sudden returns with the actual bow of Avarosa at some point and declares herself leader of the tribes? We've also got Iriel, the Ring, oldest of my 5 Oath Fathers, who gives us a little bit of interesting insight into the social structures of the tribes of the Freljord, because Iriel is probably Ashe's father. Probably. Already a greybeard when my mother chose her Bloodsworn, he had never expected the chance to join. Thrice honored and thrice blessed, Iriel is presumed to have given my mother all 3 of her births, though I alone survived to spring and naming. He taught me the sword, to fish and to hunt, but it's useless to talking to him. He imagines only my future glories as the next Warmother. I am his pride, my mother his god. So, what we got here is the introduction of a fairly new character to the story, Ashe's probable father. Like, we can't really be sure at this point in the story, but as it turns out, in the Freljord, fathers don't necessarily have claim to their children. Certainly not when the children are of the chieftain. We don't know about how the Hearthbound do things, but as it seems, Ashe's mother may have had many romantic and sexual partners over the years, one of whom probably, everyone assumes sort of maybe is probably her father, although nobody is really quite sure about it. Which is interesting because that mirrors the matrilineal way in which many people in the real world have actually tracked lineage over the years. Nowadays, we are kind of used to thinking of stuff lineage and especially the descendants of power happening in a patrilineal fashion, like going through the sons and the fathers. In Ashe's tribe, it seems to be going through the mothers and the women, because of course you can always be sure who the mother of a child is, but you can't necessarily always be sure who the father of the child is. And it's interesting to see that little detail being brought in here, giving us a little bit more of a hint about what kinds of social structures, what kind of a culture we see in the tribes of the Freljord. And that is one of the things that you can do with a comic series like this that is perhaps a little bit more difficult to do when you are creating short stories and stuff specifically for release on the universe. Now, I'm not going to spoil exactly how the comic ends. Not that there's that much to spoil, but it ends on... let's just say it ends on a cliffhanger. This is a 4-issue series. Let me read the ad copy that Riot put out alongside this comic. In League of Legends Ashe Warmother, Ashe, burdened by her mother's expectations, sets out on a dangerous quest to discover the truth behind an ancient Freljord myth. Throughout her epic journey, bonds will be broken, secrets will come to light, and Runeterra will forever be changed. This is an ad copy, obviously. I think they're probably overstating things a little bit. I don't think by the end of this comic Runeterra will be forever changed, because this is a 4-issue mini-series. It is not exactly, a 52-issue epic telling a grand-scale story impacting the fates of the entire region of the Freljord. Rather, what they're probably referring to is the fact that Ashe will find Avarosa's bow and become a major war leader in the region, and become a major tribal leader and a major political player. And we will then be restored. We will not so much see Runeterra change as we will see Runeterra reach the equilibrium of power that it has been in the main continuity of League of Legends for quite a long time. This is a prequel. It is not a comic that I expect to reveal very much new information about the future of the League of Legends universe. I certainly would like it if Riot keeps putting out comics like these, keep putting out work like this to expand the League of Legends universe, because the reason why I focused so much on the whole the parentage of Ashe thing going on is because that's the kind of interesting little detail that I think does a lot to expand the world, that does a lot to build the kinds of cultures that you can expect to see in League of Legends, and which would do much to establish cultural tensions with a place like Demacia, which is, as far as we know, extremely patrilineal, where the mantle of kingship passes from Jarvan to Jarvan to Jarvan, down through the line of sons, and daughters perhaps are not so often mentioned, and we have this where there is this clear cultural difference between these two cultures, and where you can get tension from that. You can get dramatic tension. You can get narrative exploration out of exploring how those different approaches to the systems of power change the way that these tribes and these peoples interact with each other. That stuff can happen when you have an ongoing exploratory comic series that can kind of build on itself progressively. It doesn't happen so much when you're putting out, individual little pieces here and there, sort of filling in random spots in the puzzle without ever building out the edges. Hey, just thought I'd pop into the video to remind you in a friendly little PSA that the COO of Riot has entertained himself during his years at Riot by touching his employees' genitals and buttocks, humping them in the hallways, and farting on their faces. When this was brought to light by extensive media coverage of the company and multiple employee testimonies, Riot launched a long investigation and decided to suspend him for 2 months, after which he will be permitted to return to his role as a top executive of the company. So, while Riot are apparently perfectly happy to fire employees who are rude to people who harass them on Twitter, if you are a genital-touching face farter, you get 2 weeks unpaid holiday and a bit of sensitivity training. And so confident are Riot in that decision that CEO Nicola Laurent put out a statement saying the following: Scott could have avoided owning his past and consequences. He could have left Riot. Scott chose ownership and redemption. I will root for him. I will support him through his journey and will leverage him as a great leader when he returns next year. I hope you will join me. So, to recap, Ball Toucher McFacefart is an admirable tragic hero, nobly overcoming his flaws who deserves every cent and penny of his continued executive salary, while people who defend their colleagues from harassment on Twitter are unacceptable troublemakers who should be fired for their bad behavior. Just a little PSA for you there. Riot management are pathetic hypocrites. So let's talk about the artwork. Now, I mentioned before, I've been a fan of Penger, or rather Nina Wakueva, for quite a while, and this comic is a great showcase for why I enjoy her artwork so very much. The colors, first of all, are just excellently chosen. I don't think they do anything sort of spectacular or new with the colors in this thing, but they also kind of don't need to. This doesn't need to be a grand experiment. This needs to be a competently executed comic, and indeed it is. And one of my favorite things about the color expressions in this comic is the wonderful use of tension between orange and blue. Orange and blue is a color palette distinction that you see a lot in movies. It's a really, really popular way to do the cinematography of film, and it's working really well for this comic. As you can see here, anytime we have got fire in the frame, anytime there is heat, anytime there is, comfort, the bright, saturated oranges tend to dominate the frame. Anytime we are dealing with a position around a campfire, for example, there is a particularly desperate moment later on here. Here in the comic, we are at a relatively low point for our heroes so far, but they are huddled around a campfire, and so the warmth of the campfire dominates the scene primarily. On the other hand, when things are cold and frozen, well, the comic palette switches entirely, hewing much more towards blues and grays and pale browns and stuff like that, with a lot of the color being sapped out of the image as the warmth from the scene dissipates. It's a very simple way to use colors, but it's really, really effective, and I really quite like it. And it has another useful juxtaposition where the power of true ice, especially, is one of the only saturated blues in the comics palette. Like everywhere else, there's lots of blue happening in a snowy scene like this one, but there's no saturated blue. There's no really sort of bright, shining, powerful blue. That only comes out when someone is wielding weapons made of true ice or otherwise interacting with the power of magical ice. And I think that's just a really nice way to distinguish the particular power of true ice, which is so much colder, which is so much more harsh and brutal than even the natural environment of the Freljord. Like, it's just, the visual storytelling is just super on point from the coloring perspective. The pencils, too, are quite excellent, and this is one of the things I've always liked most about Penger's art is, look at the scribbly quality of that line work. Like, it's so good. Like, there's a really fine and difficult balance that you have to strike between, when you're doing line work, between having the extreme specificity of an inked line, which is what you'll find in a lot of mainstream comics, is the very clean, the very specific smoothness of a cleanly inked line, especially when you're dealing with digital inks, where you will have like very clean, very clear outlines, where you will have like and that's nice, and you can do great comic artwork with this. But my favorite thing has always been artists who take advantage of the power of the sketch, the power of the scribble, because the scribble can do so much to imply texture. It can do so much to imply feeling of an edge and the feeling of a shape, rather than just the shape of a shape, if you take my meaning. And it's brilliantly on display, especially with the furs and the hair in this particular comic. Like, when you take a look at just the wonderful scribbly nature, really does give you the impression of like big, wild, powerful hair, which is kind of important to the character designs in a lot of this stuff. Like hair and fur and fuzz is generally very important to the design aesthetic of Freljordian fashion, but also to the design aesthetic of Freljordian people. You can see it with Ashe's sort of magnificently coiffed hair. There's lots of braids going on everywhere. There's lots of tangles and curls going on everywhere. And it's just, it gives this wonderful lifelike feeling to the characters, even when you have like something, for instance, like this version of Ashe right here, which is just the barest sketch of an expression, which is all you really need for this panel. The hair gives that extra little spark of volume and life to the posture of the character that I just think does so much to make the character human. And you can also see it, especially hair is an important part of the visual communication of Ashe's mother, for example. Ashe's mother begins the comic in battle with her sister over a question of leadership, and here, Grenna's hair is all bound up in braids, and it's, you know, full of these metal rings, and it's sort of elaborately decorated. You can really see it here, for example, here, where she's all bound up and there's braids and there's like, it's this big, magnificent mane of powerful hair that sort of indicates her powerful status as a leader of her tribe. But then we come to a more tender and a little bit more vulnerable inside scene between Ashe and her mother. Ashe knows her mother's obsession is very unhealthy, and that it is not only causing problems for the tribe, but that it may be killing her mother in a very literal way. And here, look at the way the hair communicates the state of Ashe's mother. Rather than the big, bombastic, overpowering warrior leader of the tribe, you know, with a big, powerful mane of hair, her hair's let down. Like, she has literally let her hair down. She has literally let her guard down. She's literally let herself be a little bit less controlled, a little bit more vulnerable. And the hair, rather than being this big, powerful mane, is draped around her like a cloak, or almost like a funeral shroud, you know, blocking the view of her face, blocking the view of her powerful body, and showing her almost in a kind of weakened state. And it's just like, from a visual communication standpoint, that's really, really clever. Like, to use the hair of the character in that particular way is just, it's a really nice way to do it. And that's something you can look out for in a lot of places in the comic, is the way that costuming and presentation change the way that the character is perceived. For example, Malcolm, the Frost Priest, is one of the few characters in the comic who doesn't have some kind of long hair going on. Like, pretty much everyone else in the tribe and everyone else in Ashe's community has some version of long hair going on, whether it's a long hair on their head or it's a long, big, powerful, fuzzy beard. Malcolm is the only one who's a little bit more coiffed. He's the only one who's got a haircut, as it were. He has had his hair cut. He doesn't have much of a beard. He looks young, but he also looks aesthetically distinct and different from the rest of the tribe. This also comes across in his color design, of course. He's got a lot more black and white going on than the other characters, who tend much more towards the blue and the brown and the heavy leathers that are typical of the Freljord. And just from a character design perspective, this is really well executed. Like, this is a really good way to set Malcolm apart from the rest of the tribe, so that we understand his role as an outsider, but we also understand his role as an appealing alternative for Ashe, as someone whose position and whose alternative approach to leadership provides a draw away from Ashe's mother and her particular approach. Speaking of character design, Ashe is blonde, but she is golden blonde. She does not have her signature white hair, which, you know, is pretty clear indication that somewhere along the line of this comic, Ashe is going to acquire her white iconic hair, which presumably is going to happen when she picks up the bow of Avarosa and the power of true ice, something magic, sort of signifying her transition from child, which is what she is in this comic. She's a young child essentially trying to navigate the expectations that her society has for her and the expectations that her mother has for her, along with her own desires and who she wants to become as a person, where the transition to the white hair, one imagines, eventually will be operationalized as a visual metaphor for the fact that Ashe is going to become a grown-up, a grown woman over the course of this particular comic. And again, it's quite effective, and you can see it being teased already in the first panels of the comic, because Helner, Ashe's aunt and the sister of Ashe's mother, does not have white hair either. Now, she does wield a true ice weapon, but her hair is dark brown, in contrast to the shock of white that is Ashe, the mane of Ashe's mother. And that contrast between those two models of leadership, those two women, that are really important to Ashe and are really important to the future of her tribe, you can see that tension being established already, eventually to be resolved when Ashe herself gains the white mane that her mother once had before her. And that's just, like, from a storytelling perspective, again, I'm just assuming that they're going to be executing on that somewhere down the line, but it seems pretty clear that they're gonna, and from a character design perspective, that's just really good visual storytelling. Speaking of character design, let's talk about Ashe's character design for a second. I've talked about Ashe's character design multiple times on my channel in the past, mostly in negative terms because Ashe's character design is pretty goddamn awful in League of Legends, the video game. In League of Legends, the video game, she runs around in a miniskirt and, you know, this ridiculously high cleavage halter top thing with a tiny little flimsy cloak over her back with her tits out. And it looks ridiculous, and she looks nothing like she belongs in the Freljord. She looks nothing like someone whose fashion sense is based in the Freljord, is based in that Viking aesthetic, all the heavy leathers, and like all the, it's a terrible character design. I have never liked it. And, yeah, the comic decides to say, screw that, let's not... Okay, let's fix that. Let's change things up a little bit. And so Ashe, while she is never really given the big, clunky, heavy sort of warrior outfit that her mother wears, and she's never quite 100% in tune with the fashion sense of the rest of her tribe, the outfit that they have designed for her, that I presume Bakueva has designed for her, is much more in line with something that looks like you could plausibly wear it in a, you know, Arctic environment. She, and it still harkens back to much of what is iconic about Ashe's basic outfit. It's still got the gold trimming around the edges that, you know, you find on Ashe's cloak and hood. It's still got a relatively lightweight look that sort of is meant to work with Ashe's relatively squishy, lightweight nature as a character, but there's a lot more heavy leather going on. There's a lot more coverage of her skin in general going on. Now, I would like if there was perhaps a little bit more fur and fuzz, just to kind of put her properly in contact with the aesthetics of the rest of the Freljord, but this outfit, on the whole, looks a lot more like an archer from the Freljord and a lot less like some elaborate cosplayer from the tropics. Again, her character design is something I imagine will be changing over the course of the series, much like her hair is going to be changing eventually. Eventually, I imagine that Ashe will change into an outfit that looks more like her miserable appearance in-game, but what I would really like is for Riot to take this as an opportunity. This partnership with Marvel, this big thing that they're doing, this multinational comic release to the stores that they're doing, and say, hey, maybe we should use that as an excuse or an opportunity to also update the goddamn character in-game so that she doesn't look completely bloody ridiculous anymore. I'm hoping. I'm not, you know, I'm not holding my breath or anything, because Ashe is one of those ancient, iconic character designs that is really difficult to change without making 5 million angry nerds on Reddit complain about it, but good lord, I would like it if they please. Because even here, like, Bakueva is still bound by hewing relatively close to the design aesthetic established by Ashe in the game, and especially in scenes like this one, it does become a little bit apparent that Ashe doesn't really dress like her mother, one of the most powerful warriors in the narrative of the comic, like one of the most powerful Iceborn who was even around, and, you know, the other Iceborn warriors, all of them are wearing big-ass, giant, heavy furs over their shoulders and big, heavy leather, and Ashe is still walking around in this rather flimsy-looking outfit. And while, sure, you can make the argument, oh, that's an indication that she's powerful and she can resist the cold and yada, 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 it still means that she's not... She doesn't really look like she's from the tribe as much as she probably should. Now, from a character design perspective, there's a point to that. There is a point to, like with Malcolm, who looks like an outsider to the Freljord tribe because he doesn't share their color palette, he doesn't share their, you know, aesthetic design in terms of how he grooms himself. He still wears the big-ass furs, though. Like, he still wears the big leathers and the big furs, and Ashe looks even more like an outsider to her own tribe than he does. And again, that's very much how the character feels. As a person, Ashe feels very much like someone who's both intimately connected to her tribe, but who's also alienated by the way that that tribe's culture behaves itself. In the face of crisis and an oncoming winter that they may not survive, her mother decides to go raiding for an ancient legend that may not even be real, and Ashe is profoundly alienated by that particular version of warrior culture. And so, from a character design perspective, there's a good reason to make her look different, but you can make the character look different, as Malcolm demonstrates, while still including some of the important visual signifiers of the culture, i.e. big, heavy furs that keep you warm in the winter. Anyway, the art is brilliant. The art is absolutely gorgeous, and I do want to bring up, there is one particular scene, let's see if I can find it. Here, this particular piece of artwork. Look at the way, again, here we're circling back to talk about the power of scribbles in visual design. We've got this blasting wind just kind of pounding across the mountainside, the rocks being battered by this powerful blizzard, just tearing everything apart in front of it, and you can see that happening in the line work. You can see these loose, like, very sort of rough and tumble scribbles that often overlap each other in ways that is not really consistent with what you would call clean line work, but it does such a brilliant job of conveying the feeling of this, you know, blasting, searing winds just kind of slashing across the mountainside. You can always almost see it, right, in the visual design here, that the wind is not just blowing, it is slashing, it is carving, it is slicing across the landscape, it is slicing across the characters in an incredibly unpleasant way, and that works really well. That works like gangbusters for representing the harshness of the Freljord environment. And I really, like, props to Penger, props to Nina Vacueva for the way that she's managed to achieve that, and also for the way in which she's managed to achieve the contrast in the Freljord, because we also deal with some somewhat more serene, pastoral environments here, where we have this early winter environment in the mountain where there's still grass and there's still leaves and there's still a little bit of green on the ground, and there's herding animals running around, and you can see, you know, trees and this lovely little mountainside that would probably look amazing in an Instagram photo or something like that, where, again, look at just how, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this. Look at just how scribbly and how rough and tumble Vacueva achieves this mountainside, using lots of hard blacks for the trees, contrasting them against sort of the cold winter brightness of the rest of the environment. Just scribbles upon scribbles upon scribbles upon rough edges everywhere, and it gives this wonderful sense of, you know, dense, hardy mountain vegetation of the kind that you would expect to see in you know, an environment like the Freljord. These, you know, tough little bushes clinging to the mountainside, and lots of firs and pines hanging out, forming little groves around the place, rocks, and just, it's really, really good. If nothing else, I enjoy the artwork in this comic a whole heck of a lot. And if you're looking for a comic to read, Ashe WARMOTHER looks like it's going to be an interesting thing. Now, it's the first of 4 issues. How much can you get done in 4 issues? Comics are fantastic at montage, comics are fantastic at time skipping and compressing time into relatively few panels, so you can do quite a lot of timeline in 4 issues, but I am left to wonder a little bit whether, with a limit of only 4 issues to go on, I fear that a lot of what's going on is going to be perhaps a little bit shallow, especially when it comes to the exposition and the world building. The comic does a good job of kind of balancing around, like, it, as I've criticized Riot's lore department for many, many times, it throws a lot of terminology at you really, really quickly. For example, like words like Bloodsworn and Iceborn and you know, the True Ice and Hearthbound, and like all this terminology that belongs to the fantasy universe of the world that is kind of alienating for a new reader, because it's terminology that resonates, that sounds like it's full of meaning, that is not available to anyone who hasn't taken the time to read the goddamn wiki. And this is one of the things I hate the most, by the way, about mainstream comics as well, is that so much of what happens in Marvel comics and DC comics nowadays relies on the reader having prior information and prior understanding of some relatively deep lore cuts into the comics universe, relies on the reader being willing to go to the wiki at some point in order to understand a thing that's being referenced, or a thing that forms the basis for a thing that's happening. Like, it's one of the worst problems that modern mainstream comics has, and it's a problem that Riot is also kind of struggling with, because while they do a good job of explaining a lot of all of the stuff that's being exposited in this particular comic, while they do a good job of bringing the reader along with them, I still feel that the weight of all of that. I had heard tales of frost priests who had seen the eternal darkness and become unforgiving, or behaved like Draklorn, the Faith's inquisitors, so cruel and brutal in their service to the cult of the Three Sisters. What does any of that mean? Like, if you don't know the League of Legends universe already, if you don't know about, what does any of that mean to anyone? Like, what's that even supposed to imply or signify? And the answer to that is pretty much nothing, because none of what's being exposited there is relevant at all to the proceedings of this comic itself. And so it becomes this kind of millstone, this little bit of a weight around the narrative's neck as it tries to proceed, that it keeps having to do so much legwork to establish connections to the broader lore of the League of Legends universe. And that's unavoidable. Like, there's an extent to which that is completely unavoidable, and the way to fix that problem is to not have only one comic done alongside Marvel for a mainstream audience ever, is to have a lot more lore content out there that can create like a cohesive universe for people to be introduced into things, to have some content that is introductory, that is genuinely about establishing the very baselines. But Riot, being who they are, don't really want to do that legwork a lot of the time. Riot has historically been very resistant to doing that legwork, to bringing people in. They've always been kind of accustomed to people coming to them. And this comic suffers for it a little bit. The narrative suffers from it. It has to do so much heavy lifting in terms of world building for the Freljord that, yeah, like, parts of it do drag on. Like, the text of it does drag on. You can see this panel here, like, all of these bloody panels just doing all of this narration voice. This is a hell of a lot of exposition that I don't mind it, because it is buoyed up by the brilliant artwork that supports the comic. And I love this panel border. I see how they use the tree as a de facto border between this panel and that panel. That's just such visually, that's just such a clever thing to do. But, like, again, it's like, it's still a flaw that the rest of the comic is having to work harder to make up for. And it's a difficult problem to crack, but the biggest solution to it would be to have more ongoing, regular, introductory lore content going on out there, rather than just doing these one-off projects over and over again that never establish anything like a cohesive, persistent universe for themselves. Like, to have more than just these bloody one-shots over and over and over again. Hopefully this collaboration with Marvel will lead to more things in the future. Hopefully. Because the lore of League of Legends desperately needs it. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this particular review, and good lord, we went to 41 minutes. I didn't even notice how fast time was passing. For me, anyway. Maybe it's passing really slowly for you because you were bored. In which case, I don't know why you're still watching at this point, but thank you if you are. If you enjoyed this video, there's a like button down below, there's a subscribe button and bell icon, yada yada YouTube things. And if you want to help me make videos, if you want to help me pay rent and buy clothes and eventually, you know, pay off my student loans and maybe build up some savings some point within the next 10 years, well, you can head on over to Patreon and support the channel with whatever you have available. $1 a month, if that's what you're able and willing to give. I would be very grateful to receive it. If you're not really interested in doing the recurring thing, I also do have a Ko-fi, which is like a small donation service where you can donate in bits of $3 at a time. So that's a one-time donation kind of thing, and if you want to do that as well, I would be very grateful. If you don't want to do any of those things, of course, that's completely okay. I'm just happy that you've watched the videos so far. As always, just watching the videos, maybe sharing them with some other people who might be interested, that is, you are doing your part to help support the content creators that you enjoy if you do those things for me or for anyone else. So please don't really worry about it. I don't know if I'm going to have a lot more videos out before Christmas. Probably not. December has been a bit of a chaos month for me. I've got a vlog over on the vlog channel. Link to that down in the description if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about what's happening with me and why there have been so few videos in December. That's all happening over there. TLDR, I've got a hell of a lot of work that I'm behind on and I'm trying to catch up on before the new year begins. But hopefully in the new year, things will get back to normal with lots and lots of videos. At least I hope so. So, if you haven't enjoyed this video, well, legends tell that there is a means for which with which you can express your displeasure and your unhappiness, that there is this artifact that scholars and saints have claimed have the power to demonstrate displeasure in online mediums. Now, personally, I think this thing is a bit of a children's story. I think it's a little bit of a myth. Like, it's a story that we tell each other around the campfire at night to convince ourselves that we have some kind of power to influence the world in this digital economy, when, frankly, we are all slaves to the great machine. But if truly you do seek to avail yourself of that ancient and terrible power, well, look to the stars and follow the brightest one on cold winter nights when the moon is clear in the sky. And up on the hills of the great north, you may see the ancient world tree spreading its branches out across the world, and at its root you will find the three wise women, the fates who weave the destinies of all men. And if you ask them, and if you make the proper sacrifices, maybe they will point you on your way to whatever horde the dislike button has been spirited away to. What monsters may guard it, I do not know, and I cannot tell you, but guard yourself well with steel and fur and leather, and carry lots of anti-venoms, because the road will be long and the journey will be perilous. But if you must, you will one day be able to click the dislike button and tell me that you didn't care for my overlong video about a comic put out by a video game company. Thank you very much for watching.